This is from the collection Am I Blue? Stories of Coming Out from the Silence. This short story is called The Honorary Shepherds by Gregory Maguire. To satisfy that particular curiosity first, yes, this is a story about two boys who sleep together. Eventually. Not genitally or anyway, not at the time of this writing, but focus, liberally as you like, on the picture of it. Two teenage boys on a single-size futon, under a fraying tangerine-colored Afghan, reeking of mothballs. Two guys, warm, scared, unbelieving, alive, cautious, too alert, too new to each other to giggle or wisecrack. They are both beautiful, at least to each other. The casting department of a film company might not agree. Sex sells everything, even sex you might disapprove of. That's why the image of the boys abed starts this story. It used to be stories could work up to such a development, but in the current day there's no time for the slow build-up. Notice how the movie musicals are passé. Now we make do with 3-minute music videos. Notice how often the trailers they show at Cineplex 1 through 12 are more interesting than the 98-minute feature film you paid good money to see. In the future, there will be no movies, only coming attractions, no symphonies, only advertising jingles, no novels, only short stories, maybe only postcards, vignettes. The camera is about to leave this opening vignette and not return, so take it all in while you can. The Afghan slips off in a manner suspiciously gratifying of our natural voyeurism. The censors of frontal nudity need not be alarmed. Both boys are lying on their stomachs. Their naked legs and behinds, the hollows of their back, are striped honey and charcoal by the bars of strengthening dawn light falling diagonally across them. Deep in the blue-purple shadow from the neck up, they turn their heads so they can look at each other's faces at close range. 3 inches apart. 2 inches. 1. Freeze frame. Check the color registration. Cobalt purple shadow, tangerine blanket, lips are gray rose. Cut. The younger of the two boys is Lee Rosario Kincaid. Lee's family is Puerto Rican, Polish, and Irish. Not to get overly schematic, but he is the thinker of the two. The older, Pete Blake, is the gutted, trembling one. Pete's mom is Chinese and his dad was an American black from Western Africa, Gambia probably, but all those troubled generations ago. Between them, the boys represent the gene pools of 4 continents. It's the melting pot thing carried to absurdity, but it's true. Full-blooded American boys. These things happen. Lee Rosario Kincaid has wound a school scarf around his neck and drawn the Afghan up to his armpits. His shoulders are white, like the porcelain of old faucet fixtures. He tells Pete Blake about his background. It's pure US of A. Contrary cultures meet in melting pot America and fall in love. It's like West Side Story 2. That's how I imagine it, the story of my life. Started in 1959, my grandparents' generation. Remember Tony and Maria in the movie? After the rumble, after Tony the Polak kills Maria the Spick's brother and runs to Tony anyway in true love, but Tony gets shot, Maria catches the falling hero. Love should be stronger than hate, across their ethnic differences. True love. It's great. When they showed that movie at Dunster Institute at an assembly, everyone laughed except for the girls. Some of the girls did laugh, harder than the guys. Next day, a black kid from a housing project got knifed in the locker room. So much for tolerance. Here's what happened next, though, as I imagine it. Maria is pregnant from her one ecstatic wedding night with Tony. What do you think One Hand, One Heart was all about, anyway? This was pre-AIDS, and people didn't have condoms in their pockets and pocketbooks all the time. They made love, Tony and Maria. I hope it was wonderful because it was Tony's only time. Maria's family sends her back to Puerto Rico to have the baby. Rita Moreno has to go to chaperone her. She's bored stiff the whole time. Who wants to do hot tamale dances with big white teeth clacking like castanets for an 8 months pregnant steamboat? That's not how she cares to spend her time. The baby is born, though, and they name her Antonetta. That's my mom, who really is half Polish and half Puerto Rican, and her name is Antonetta, a little bit of Hispanic Polish bacon. Maria sings, "There's a place for us," to get the baby to go to sleep at 3 in the morning. After a while, Mama and baby go back to the west side in New York. They're tearing down the slums to build Lincoln Center. Antonetta grows up being hated for being part Polak. She learns to make golubkas like the best of them, though. At a bar in Queens in 1975, when she's 16, Antonetta meets up with Brendan Kincaid, an illegal immigrant from County Cork, Ireland. A couple of beers too many, and not having learned the family lesson, Antonetta conceives me. Brendan, being Irish Catholic, marries her on the spot. Grandma Maria, by 1975, has gotten dumpy and is still trailing around Lincoln Center in that same virginal white dress. She's had to have her seamstress friends take it out at the sides 3 times. She misses Tony still, but she curses her daughter Antonetta for making the same mistake she did. But, surprise, surprise, Antonetta and Brendan are happily married. They get a better deal of it than Maria and Tony did. Nobody shoots Brendan. He turns into a good father, moves the family to Poughkeepsie, starts his own roofing concern. He's pretty happy. Until the day, yet to come, he will learn that his only son, Lee Rosario Kincaid, is gay. Then he might wish he'd used a condom 17 years ago. Pete Blake laughs at this story, the kind of laugh that has a knowing wince knitted all through it. He's not sure what part of this family history are true, but there sits Lee Rosario Kincaid across from him in his bed, a face as grim as Churchill's. Lee has the turnip-like forehead of the Irish, a complexion of scalded milk like the Polish, and dark hair, iron rigid in its curls, like the Puerto Ricans. Lee thinks he is hideous. He isn't good-looking, it's true, except in love, but he is striking. Pete Blake is gorgeous, but doesn't know it. He can't tell Lee his story in so dramatic a fashion. It comes out in sentence fragments, reservations, ellipses, breathy hesitations. Lee finally pieces it together as such. Pete Blake's mom is from Boston's Chinatown. His dad is from Mattapan, the ghetto grim place to be from and hard to get out of. Religion never entered into their story, at least not for Pete to tell it. They got married. Pete's dad was a professional soldier, not a draftee, and he didn't get killed in Vietnam but died in a jeep crash in the Philippines in '79. His mom went back to live with her Chinese-speaking family above, you guessed it, a dim sum restaurant. Pete is part black, part Chinese. His mom's family hates him for looking so black. His dad's family loved him, but that was before. They were a small family and they died off. An uncle got shot in a gunfight. A grandma died of grief or obesity or both. A cousin got a scholarship to Princeton and left and never came back. Pete would go wandering around the littered sidewalks of Mattapan where his black grandma once lived, missing her. Pete adored his mom, but she had little time for him, chopping ginger and spring onions and studying the pattern into which they fell on the chopping board rather than the pattern of her son's need. South Boston High was lousy with racial trouble. Pete, taking a clue from his cousin's escape, got the guidance counselor to do some work for a change. Pete applied to Dunster Institute, a fancy private high school in upstate New York, a boarding school. He got in, full scholarship. His mom was pissed. His Chinese relatives were relieved and gave him money on the sly to ensure his departure. Pete had never stopped being a mighty shame to them. Those sensual negroid lips, that very un-Asian fanny that stuck out like a bumper on a car, the color, the browned oak leaf color, unacceptable, shaming. Pete Blake didn't have so much of a problem being gay because he hardly had time to realize it yet. It was being neither Chinese nor black that bothered him. He was so twisted up inside about it, too, that he had no idea how tormentingly handsome he was. He would probably learn, and in the sad, or maybe lucky, irony of it, he would figure it out only after his beauty had begun to fade. This story has a plot, and here it goes. Lee and Pete are just meeting each other for the first time. It's a film seminar, senior elective. The class consists of 14 kids, some brainy girls who dressed in black and never smile, the usual 3 or 4 girls who take any course Pete Blake takes because he smites them so with true lust, a couple of jocks who mistakenly think a film class will be easy sailing and boost their grade point averages. It won't, and it doesn't. Pete, of course, always looking for images of himself to relate to. And Lee, who is a junior, but his good grades permit a few allowances like entry into this class. The plot is not about how Lee and Pete meet and fall in love, or only tangentially so. They're both still a bit in the dark about sex, and while they've heard about sexual preference liberty, they haven't thought about it applied to them, but they do notice that each other in the classroom. They both notice the teacher, a Ms. Cabbage. Sounds as if the name has been changed to protect the innocent or amuse the real readers, but it's real. Violet Cabbage. She's mid-40s, thick-waisted, sharp as a tack, wears a wig because of chemotherapy treatments, and has a husband named Dennis who has pecs like watermelons and adores her. Ms. Cabbage starts the class on thinking about myths. Myths are the understructure of culture, she says. Everything we have an opinion on is supported by one of our cultural myths. Nobody knows what she means. She adjusts her wig, about which she makes no pretense. Then she takes it off. It sits in her hand like the pelt of a raccoon. Her baldish head startles, even scares students. The myth of beauty, she says, is that beauty is the outward sign of inner moral goodness. As weakly I become less beautiful, I fear the loss of my moral value. What are the myths that teach me this equation, that beauty and goodness are related? Lee, who is quick off the mark, shoots his hand up. Sleeping Beauty. She wasn't good, said Violent Cabbage. She was neutral. She wasn't bad, said Lee, which is almost the same thing as being good. In the United States of Amnesia, where apathy is king. Point taken, don't be a smartass. Anyone else? Everyone stares and looks stupid. Christian art, says Ms. Cabbage. You ever see a homely Madonna? Mary is innocent and pure, and so she has to be perfectly made. Ravishing. Naturally, being good, she's not aware of her beauty, and so has no sin of pride in her magnificent features. Snow White, said Pete, the only black or golden brownish kid there. Better than Sleeping Beauty, agrees Miss Cabbage, because it's her selfish beauty that inflames her stepmother, the Queen. Beauty and the Beast, said someone, and Violet Cabbage does a credible imitation of a crackly-voiced Angela Lansbury as Jessica Fletcher, solving the mystery of the appearance. Tale as old as time, she sings. She stops. Tale as old as time, she repeats sternly. That's myth. Now the modern versions move from the beauty of Mary and the female saints in Western European culture, from the beauty of Venus and the Three Fates, to Guinevere, the beauty of Britannia, the romantic statues of blind justice governing the courthouses of the land, the film stars of the 20s, and so on. A direct link. Guinevere was a hussy, says Lee. bravely, because really he's not supposed to be in this class and shouldn't be rocking the boat so early, but he's afraid of being thought slow because he's a junior, so he's overcompensating. Gorgeous Natalie Wood as Maria in West Side Story probably slept with Tony premaritally, which as Catholics means they both go to hell. But they suffer for it, don't they? Says Ms. Cabbage. Tony dies and Maria is left all alone. They're redeemed by their suffering, so Maria is still beautiful in the closing credits. She is getting a bit off course and tacks them back on target. 10 minutes. Pair off, discuss the myths that created your sense of self. Count off 1, 2. And they counted off, Lee and Pete, oh, the cleverness of the beautiful fates, are a pair. They don't look at each other and mumble out of mutual glum shyness. Here the scene changes gratuitously, because these days you can't expect to have an attention span of longer than 2 pages. No offense intended, it's all about too much TV, just as they say. A flash forward. It's a Saturday, and Lee takes the bus from his house on Hyde Park and meets Pete at the school gate. Pete has a video camcorder. They've gotten teamed up for a semester project and want to familiarize themselves with the school's equipment. Dunster Institute, despite its sobriquet as Dumpster Institute, is well endowed in the audio-visual department. If this story ever gets bought for an after-school TV special, please note, the soundtrack of this montage should be more staccato than legato. No strings, hi-hats, cymbals, maybe something mysterious like Indian pipes or polyphonic chanting, but quick, jumpy. This isn't about puppy love. The boys are devilish. They are coming to know each other, not by impeded observation, but by looking at each other through the camera. And by being looked at. Pete walks on the back of a park bench as if it's a balancing beam. Lee holds the camera at shoulder height, which exaggerates the bulge of both crotch and bum. Pete does a gymnastic thing and slips. The film keeps rolling as Lee drops the camera, and the film will show only fallen leaves on the underside of a van parked at the curb as Lee puts his hands on Pete for the first time, scared that Pete has hurt himself badly. He hasn't, actually, but Pete lies there, not even knowing he's pretended to be winded, not knowing the reason why, because Lee leaves his hands, lightly but tellingly, on the frayed lapels of Pete's denim jacket. Remember, no strings. No strings attached, not yet. Pete grumpily gets up at last and hobbles to reclaim the camcorder. It's Lee's turn in front of the lens. Lee, who is less athletic than Pete, becomes verbal, spouting lines of poetry, doing imitations of the teachers, including Ms. Cabbage, then Bette Midler, being campy without knowing what camp is or why, and then devastatingly an imitation of Pete, lowering his eyelashes in that unconscious denial of beauty that makes Pete the more enticing, sucking in his gut and moving with the dancer's airy gracefulness. Pete is awed at Lee's ruinous talent at mimicry and ashamed of how he is seen. Lee, of course, can't feed Pete's beauty back to him because Lee doesn't have it. So what Pete reads is narcissism and self-love, exactly the opposite of what he feels, and just as ugly, though in a different way, as self-hatred. Let's stop, Pete says, still filming. Don't stop, says Lee in a voice still imitating Pete's. Don't stop, Lee, film me. Let me reveal the world my immense love for you. I can't help myself. Hee hee hee. The laughs are in Lee's real voice, not in Pete's copy one. For Pete has set the camera down and he has run to tackle Lee into the rustling blanket of maple leaves. They both yell and squeal and wrestle, and if you must read this as foreshadowing sex, despite my instructions, I can't stop you. But Pete is mostly angry, and his punches and jabs really hurt Lee, who is confused and doesn't know what he's done wrong. What should come next is a dialogue, a painful one. It's several weeks later. November is cupping its cold hands around our boys. Key colors, slate, pumpkin, brown. Aromas, coffee, burning leaves, though illegal. People still do it. The cold, dull stink of soil turned for the planting of spring bulbs. For background music, cue in the Adagio of Shostakovich's Second Piano Concerto. Neither Lee nor Pete is especially interested in classical music, but struggling to identify their growing friendship with something outside themselves, they notice a poster announcing a famous pianist coming to the Vassar College. They attend, the youngest members of the audience. Lee is beginning to notice how Pete attracts the glances of women and men alike. This makes Lee think, first time, the dynamite question, am I attracted to him? And does that mean... Yikes. The dialogue follows in a Greek diner downtown. The coffee comes in paper cups with a picture of the Acropolis printed in Aegean blue between borders of the Greek key design. Editorial advice about this story, however, suggests 15 typed pages max, so I'll skip the dialogue. It's the ugly one, the lying one. How many girls they've come on to, and how successfully. Neither Pete nor Lee is given to lying, but fear prompts them. Maybe this conversation isn't very difficult, whether it's between boys or between girls or between straight or gay kids. You can fill in the blanks yourself. If you're lucky, you outgrow this kind of sneakiness. If you're strong, you don't need it. Well, that's my myth anyway. Lying is weak. But I guess there are situational complexities. And an ideal, after all, is something to aim for. Each one is acutely aware of his own lies, of course. As Pete leans past Lee to pay the cashier on the way out, brushing into Lee's side from hip to shoulder, it's as if their clothes have heat melted away, and they've touched private skin for those 20 inches. Then they know each other has been lying, and rather than draw them together, this divides them. They pretend a boredom, a nonchalance as they part, and this pretense gives them both the creeps. Now, chaotically, the focus of this story changes. You'll see why I started with naked boys in bed when I tell you it now veers into religion. If I'd started with religion, who would have bothered to read this far? Lee and Pete have fallen in love. But let's not leave their pet names, their explorations, their little alibis, and especially their fear of AIDS. They will get through things okay. They're smart, and the school distributes pamphlets, much to the loud chagrin of some parents. They are each other's worlds, for a while. Terrified, they're also inspired. It doesn't escape the notice of Ms. Cabbage, but frankly, she has other things on her mind, namely her health, which is deteriorating. And she's secretly pleased for both of them. But of course, if she let it be known, she'd probably be sacked, and she needs her health insurance now more than ever. The end of semester assignment is a big one. They can work independently or in pairs. They are to rewrite a myth and film it. Naturally, Pete and Lee are working on it together. They meet in Pete's room in the dorm and sit in each other's laps and stroke each other's hair and kiss each other gently and jump up from time to time to check the lock on the door, which is always still locked, of course. Eventually, they get down to work. At first, Lee wants to remake West Side Story, showing a very pregnant Maria coming back into the ghetto with an Uzi or something. But Pete correctly points out that West Side Story is already the reworking of older myths and stories, and they should get to the root of something. They are becoming bolder through their love of each other. In a bookstore, Lee has found 2 postcards of David Hockney's We the Two Boys Together Clinging, and with blushing courage bought them. The postcards mark their places in whatever books they're reading at the moment. Pete suggests they redo a myth that has rendered the world only in heterosexual images to create a place for themselves in there. There's a place for us, he sings, to tease Lee and tempt him to say yes. Of course, this is a bold move, but they both knew that Ms. Cabbage is dying, And in an unspoken way, they want to show her she is helping them change their lives. So maybe they'll be shunned by their classmates or laughed at. So what? They'll deal with that when it comes, they say to each other through their innocence, blissfully unaware of how much it may hurt. But what myth to rewrite? First, they think of stereotypes of gay guys, chisel-jawed, lean and rich and white and strong, coolly aloof from society, from family, from the past, from attachments of any sort except sex. Both Pete, with his aching and unanswerable need of Chinese and black American families, and Lee, whose dad is going to throw up when he learns Lee is gay, hate this modern myth, this stereotype. I don't want to be alone, says Pete. I want to be with you first. The time out for some distracting nuzzling. And I want to belong to my families and cultures still. Why should I allow myself to be kicked out? Lee feels the same, and only now realizes it. He's proud of the Puerto Rican in his blood, and of the Polish, and of the Irish. What binds them all together, he realizes with the gulp, is the Catholicism. The only thing he is on all sides besides American is Catholic. All his genes have been Catholic for 1,000 years or more. Can't be Catholic and gay, says Pete, who doesn't actually know. Pope says so, I think. Why should I allow myself to be kicked out? Lee feeds Pete's words right back to him. Besides, you can't be kicked out of a faith. Faith starts inside your heart and ends up in eternity. All you can be kicked out of is a building, which is the bus stop of faith, sort of. And what's a building? And that's how they make their final project, called the Honorary Shepherds. Since all the fellow students are helping each other, P and Lee talk one of the jocks into being Joseph, and one of the girls permanently in a black turtleneck to be Mary. They use a tool shed out by the football field for the stable, and a clamp light hidden in some weeds to be the light of the baby Jesus in the crib. The music is maybe a little too avant-garde a choice, snatches of the Adagio of Shostakovich's Second Piano Concerto, but they've come to think of it as their song, an indulgence. And what the 6-minute video shows is this: night skies, stars, sheep, real sheep. There's a sheep farm about 20 minutes out of Poughkeepsie, and since it's been an unseasonably warm fall, the sheep aren't penned in for the night yet. A lucky stroke. No music. Lee and Pete, in bathrobes and towels, just like kindergartners in a pageant, are crouched around a dying campfire. They break a baguette and share it. Nobody speaks in the whole film, since no one knows what the Aramaic sounds like, and it's already weird enough to have a half Chinese, half black shepherd in the hills of the suburbs of Bethlehem. The camera lingers on the touch of hands, one shepherd to another. It is a warming touch, a touch of friendship. There are other shepherds on the hills, farther away. Some are the girls in the class, and this is important to Lee and Pete, but it doesn't come out very early in the finished project. From across the fields, there are glances and waves as the various shepherds settle down for the night. Lee and Pete sit close, shivering, and then closer, to keep warm, apparently. Pete's arm encircles Lee, and Lee's head goes onto Pete's shoulder. They've discussed renting fake beards, but discarded that idea early. It's not a sex film, it's a film about love. The music starts. The boys sit up, first apart from each other in fear, then their arms encircling each other, looking all about. Some fancy camera work, Pete read how in a book, having to do with photographing the reflection of light on water using mirrors. It looks stagey and amateur, but you get the idea. It's like a comet. It's like the end of the world. It's like the beginning of the world. The boys begin to run, stumbling and helping each other, wheeling arms, spinning robes showing stretches of leg. In the final version, even Pete can't deny that he is stunningly photogenic. Cut to the insides of the stable. The camera doesn't linger here, just long enough to give you the traditional idea. Traditional and radical, too. Radical meaning root, at the root. This is Christianity at the root, where it all began. The child who would be Christ and grow up to preach the gospel of love is ably portrayed by the 150-watt bulb. No matter what else has happened to Christianity, the story could certainly tolerate this, that among the grizzled, careworn shepherds there might have been two young men who brought their love for each other with them as they came to adore at the manger. And the proud mother didn't care who loved her wonderful child. How could she care? That's why all children are born, to be loved. The film ends with a slow scrutinizing pan over a 15th century nativity scene printed on page 553 of Janssen's The History of Art, 1985 edition. A nativity in ochres attributed to Geerten Tots St. Jan's. The Virgin is, of course, graceful and pure as an egg. The cow is placid. The angels look like munchkins, disproportionately small to Mary's looming loveliness. Seen through the door of the stable, in the background is a white blur in the sky, and this is the messenger angel. The distant shepherds are silhouetted, dark forms against the lighted hillside. One is on his knees in fear. Two are standing near each other, shadowy, shoulder to shoulder, close as a couple of lovers. Maybe those are female shepherds further on, and mixed-race shepherds just on the other side of the hill, and handicapped shepherds in wheelchairs just out of sight, and Buddhist and atheist and vegetarian, and every kind of shepherd you can think of. Ah, writes Miss Cabbage, my only remark is that of course the Holy Birth was always meant to be one that would bring people together, not tear them apart. Very fine work, boys. Live out the old myth, pour new life into it. You belong there. Truth be told, not many of the parents or kids of Dunster Institute actually even get the point of the honorary shepherds when they see it on student display night. They clap politely. But Lee and Pete have both learned something. Ms. Cabbage has taught them well. A myth is yours only if you choose to own it. Myths, like faith, are wide and capacious and of their nature generous. There is more that she teaches than that she teaches them, but it can't all be put into words. They put it on their lips and give it to each other from time to time, and in this way remember her after she dies.